My daughter was ashamed of me in front of her friends, and my wife called me a loser before leaving me. The moment you walk into my garage in Rusty Springs, Pennsylvania, time stops. Not in that poetic way people talk about, but like someone literally hit pause on 1987 and forgot to press play again. The smell of motor oil hangs in the air like cologne. Guns N' Roses' Sweet Child of Mine crackles to my ancient radio, and the calendar on the wall is so faded you'd think Ronald Reagan might still be president. I'm David, 45, just your average small-town mechanic with grease permanently embedded under my fingernails and a passion for fixing things that most people would rather throw away. This town, man, Rusty Springs, is exactly what it sounds like, a place where everything's a little weathered, a little worn down, but somehow keeps on ticking. The diner still serves those thick milkshakes in metal cups, cold enough to give you brain freeze, but worth every second of the pain. There's even a corner with 2 arcade machines, Pac-Man and Galaga, that the owner, Jimmy, keeps running for the atmosphere, though I'm probably the only one who still drops quarters in them during lunch breaks. My Ford F-150 has seen better days, but the tape deck still works perfectly. Got my Bon Jovi, Springsteen, and Aerosmith cassettes in the glove compartment. My kid rolls her eyes every time I pop one in, but I catch her humming Living on a Prayer when she thinks I'm not listening. Speaking of my kid, Lily's 15 now. Smart as a whip and twice as sharp. Got her mother's looks. Thank God. But lately she's got her mother's attitude toward me too. I see it in her eyes when I pull up to school to pick her up, that quick dart of her gaze, checking if any of her friends are watching before she slides into my truck with its peeling paint and the lingering smell of motor oil. Once I heard her whisper to her friend, thinking I couldn't hear, "He's just a mechanic. Nothing cool." Cut deeper than any rusted bolt I've ever sliced my hand on. Her mother, Karen, well, that's another story altogether. We met back when my job at the garage seemed temporary, something to pay bills until real life started. 20 years later, and here we are, her looking at me like I'm a stain she can't get out, and me still smelling like the garage when I come home. Last Tuesday, I walked in with grease-stained jeans, and Karen just stared at me with those cold eyes. Same ones that used to light up when I'd surprise her with wildflowers picked from the side of the road on my way home. Now they're just 2 blue ice cubes, freezing me in place while she reminds me I'll never escape this hole we're living in. The worst part? Sometimes I think she might be right, but I've got my ways of dealing. Grandfather always said humor is a WD, 40 of life, loosens up the rusty parts of your soul. So I tell myself, at least the cars love me. Well, except for that Pontiac that spits gasoline like an offended cat whenever I try to check its fuel line. My grandfather taught me everything I know about engines and people. He'd say, a man isn't measured by the dollars in his wallet, but by the number of folks he's pulled out of trouble. By that measure, I might just be a millionaire. Not that Karen would see it that way. Take Mrs. Clark from down the street. 82 years old. Husband died in 2009, and her 98 Buick is her only connection to the outside world. When it broke down last month, she brought me a tin of homemade cookies and tears in her eyes. "I can't afford much, David," she said. "I fix her car for the price of those cookies," which, by the way, were the best damn snickerdoodles I've ever tasted. I didn't tell Karen about Mrs. Clark's car. Last time I did something like that, she exploded, saying I was giving away food from our table. I wanted to ask her what table exactly would miss the $20 I didn't charge, but some battles aren't worth fighting. Sometimes, when the shop is quiet and even the radio's just humming static, I think about how life takes these weird turns. There's that Robert Frost poem they made us read in high school. You know, the one about roads diverging in a yellow wood. I wonder where the other road might have led if I hadn't dropped out of community college when Dad got sick, if I hadn't needed to take over the garage. Don't get me wrong, I love what I do. There's something deeply satisfying about taking something broken and making it work again. The look on someone's face when their car starts up after they thought it was a goner, better than any paycheck. I try to teach Lily that. Last summer, I tried to show her how to change the oil in the truck. Thought it might be a father-daughter thing, you know? She lasted 5 minutes before declaring it gross and disappearing back into her room with her phone. Karen just shook her head at me like I'd suggested teaching our daughter to pickpocket. She needs to focus on college, Karen said, not end up stuck like you. Stuck, like I'm a bug on flypaper, not a man who made choices. The guys at the garage, Mike, Tony, and old Pete, they get it. We got this brotherhood of busted knuckles and bad jokes. Yesterday, Tony was telling us about how his wife bought this fancy coffee maker that needs its own engineering degree to operate. Spend 15 minutes trying to get a cup of coffee, he said, and all I got was hot water with floating beans and a lecture about how I don't appreciate nice things. We all laughed, but there was that undercurrent, you know? That feeling that maybe our wives had a point. Maybe we should want more than what we have. But here's the thing about wanting more. Sometimes it feels like betraying who you are. Like I'm supposed to be ashamed of loving the simplicity of taking apart an engine, understanding all its pieces, and putting it back together better than it was before. On my workbench, there's a photo of Lily when she was 7. She drew this picture of me as a superhero with a wrench instead of a cape. Daddy the Fixer, she called me. Said I could fix anything in the whole wide world. That picture's faded now, yellowed at the edges, but I keep it there to remind me of when I was someone's hero. Last night, Karen and I had another fight. Same one we've been having for years, just with different words. She wanted me to show some ambition. Maybe sell the garage, get a management job at the auto parts chain that opened in the next town over. Wear a tie, make more money, be someone she can introduce at parties without that tight little smile. Either you change or I'm done, she said. Not a threat, a fact, laid down between us like a line in the sand. Lily was supposed to be asleep, but I saw her shadow retreat from the hallway, listening, absorbing, judging. Later, alone in the garage with just the crickets and the distant sound of the highway for company, I found myself staring at that old drawing on the wall. Daddy the Fixer. What a joke. I can't even fix my own marriage, my relationship with my daughter. Maybe I really am nobody. Just a greased monkey in a dying town, holding on to memories like they're vintage car parts. No practical use, but too much sentimental value to throw away. I flipped on the radio, trying to drown out my thoughts. And wouldn't you know it, Bon Jovi's Living on a Prayer started playing. Tommy and Gina holding on to what they've got. Does it even make a difference if you make it or not? I turned it up, let the music fill the empty spaces. Tomorrow would be another day of fixing other people's problems while my own fell apart. But for tonight, maybe that prayer was enough. That Bon Jovi song was still echoing in my head 3 weeks later, when I found the divorce papers on the kitchen counter. No warning, no final conversation, just cold legal documents with yellow sticky tabs, showing me where to sign my life away. Karen hadn't even waited for me to come home to drop the bomb. The coward's way out, leaving papers to do the talking she couldn't face. I stood there, still smelling of motor oil and someone else's brake fluid, staring at those papers like they were written in hieroglyphics. Turned out Karen had been planning this for months. She'd been seeing Greg Peterson, a hotshot lawyer from a fancy part town whose BMW I'd seen parked outside the diner a few times. Never thought much about it before. Now I couldn't stop thinking about it. Greg with his perfect haircut that probably cost more than I make in a day. Greg with his whitened teeth and tailored suits. Greg who'd never had to crawl under a car in January when the temperature dropped, so low your fingers stick to metal if you're not careful. The worst part came a week later at Lily's school concert. I stood in the back, trying to be invisible in my cleanest flannel shirt, watching my baby girl play clarinet with the school band. She was amazing, has her grandmother's musical talent, not a drop of mine. I was so proud I could have burst. After the show, parents clustered around the kids, taking photos and offering congratulations. I pushed through, wanting to tell Lily how great she was, when I heard that laugh. Karen's laugh, but not aim at one of my dumb jokes anymore. She was standing with Greg, his arm around her waist like he'd earned the right. Lily saw me coming, and her eyes did that thing, that quick flicker of embarrassment. But now it was worse because Greg was there, whispering something that made Lily and her friends laugh. As I got closer, I caught the tail end. Just the guy who turns wrenches for a living. The kids giggled. Lily giggled with them. My heart felt like someone had taken a socket, wrenched to it, and twisted hard. I forced a smile and said something about being proud of her performance. She gave me a quick, awkward hug and turned back to her friends. I stood there a moment too long, like an idiot, before mumbling that I'd see her on the weekend. As I walked away, I whispered to myself, at least nuts and bolts don't whisper behind my back. Grandfather's humor, as WD-40 theory was being put to the test, and I wasn't sure it was holding up. The next day, I started moving my stuff into the cramped apartment above my garage. Karen had already found an upgraded model in Greg, complete with McMansion in the new development on the edge of town. Me? I got a pull-out couch, a microwave that only heated on one side, and a spectacular view of the stars through the holes in my roof. 5-star accommodations, I told Mike when he helped me carry the couch up the narrow stairs, if you count the mold spots as stars. But jokes aside, that first night alone was something I wouldn't wish on anyone. 45 years old, surrounded by boxes of what Karen had deemed not worth keeping, listening to the unfamiliar creaks of my shop below. I kept thinking about Lily in her new bedroom at Greg's place, wondering if she missed me at all. The divorce proceedings moved fast. Turns out when your wife is sleeping with a lawyer, things tend to accelerate. Greg pulled strings, called in favors, and before I knew it, I was labeled financially unreliable with limited visitation rights to my own daughter. My parents called from Arizona, where they'd retired. They meant well, but their disappointment came through loud and clear. Emily's clinic is expanding again, my mother said about my younger sister. She's thinking of opening a second location. The unspoken comparison hung between us like a bad smell. Emily, the successful one. David, the one who got stuck. Never mind that I'd stayed in Rusty Springs to take care of them when Dad hard acted up, or that I'd put my own plans on hold to keep the family business alive. I started taking extra jobs, fixing cars after hours, trying to scrape together enough for a lawyer who might help me get more time with Lily. Sleep became optional. Food became whatever I could microwave in under 3 minutes. Tony noticed the dark circles under my eyes. You look like you tried to change the oil on a moving car, he said one morning, sliding a cup of coffee across the workbench to me. I tried to keep my sense of humor alive. If life were an engine, mine would be smoking from all 4 cylinders and leaking every fluid known to man. I heard a segment on the public radio station one afternoon while replacing a transmission. The host was discussing Socrates and his famous quote about how the unexamined life is not worth living. I snorted, hands deep in transmission fluid. I was examining the hell out of my life these days. It wasn't making living it any easier. At my lowest point, I realized I'd missed a call from Lily. By the time I tried to call back, it went straight to voicemail. She didn't try again. My texts got shorter and shorter replies until they were just K or a thumbs-up emoji. Each Sunday, when I was supposed to have her, became a gamble. Would she actually show up, or would it be some last-minute gymnastics meet, study session, or friend's birthday party that just couldn't be missed? Despite it all, I kept doing what I'd always done, fixing things. Mr. Reynolds, the high school history teacher who drove that ancient Toyota Corolla, brought it in making a sound like angry cats in a blender. He apologized that he couldn't pay full price because budget cuts had frozen teacher salaries again. I knew he used that car to drive kids to debate tournaments and chess matches when parents couldn't take them. So I charged him half price and threw in an oil change for free. Karen would have had a fit about my charity cases. But Karen wasn't there anymore to complain. One Wednesday evening, I was closing up shop when I overheard Greg's voice from the diner across the street. He was sitting with some buddies, looking like an ad for expensive scotch in his tailored suit and shiny watch. The kid barely mentions him anymore. He was saying, loud enough for half the diner to hear, "Another few months, and she'll forget she ever had a loser for a father." I stood there, wrench in hand, wondering what would happen if I walked over and introduced that wrench to his perfect teeth. But that's not who I am. Never has been. So I just went back to my apartment, cracked open a warm beer, and stared at the ceiling instead. That night, I scrolled through old photos on my phone. Lily on my shoulders at the county fair. Lily learning to ride a bike. Her face a perfect mix of terror and determination. Lily helping me change spark plugs when she was 8, before she decided being smart about cars wasn't cool for girls. I'd lost so much more than a marriage. I'd lost my kid, my family, my sense of place in the world. The next day, I checked my bank account before buying groceries. Greg's legal maneuvering had taken its toll. Child support set an amount that assumed I was hiding money in offshore accounts or something. The number staring back at me from the ATM was so low it was almost funny. Almost. On Friday night, I called Lily, hoping to confirm our Sunday plans. Straight to voicemail again. I left a message trying to sound upbeat, mentioning the new Marvel movie she'd wanted to see. An hour later, I got a text. Can't this Sunday. Maybe next week. Sorry. No explanation. No counteroffer. Just another blow I was expected to absorb without complaint. I sat in my dark shop with nothing but a six-pack for company. The beer wasn't helping, but I kept drinking anyway, hoping it might numb the ache in my chest. Around midnight, headlights swept across the wall as a car pulled into my lot. Who the hell needed car repairs at midnight? I considered ignoring it, but habit and the need for money won out. An old Chevy, maybe 89 or 90, rumbled to a stop, sounding worse than a garbage disposal trying to chew through silverware. The driver, an older man with white hair and glasses perched on the end of his nose, climbed out slowly. Mr. Thompson. I recognized him from around town. Shop's technically closed, but what's the problem? He looked at me with sharp eyes, taking in my disheveled appearance and the beer in my hand. Sounds like we both got problems, son. Mine's just louder. I set down the bottle and wiped my hands on my jeans, suddenly conscious of how pathetic I must look. Pull into the bay. I'll take a look. As I watched Thompson's beat-up Chevy struggle into position, backfiring like it was auditioning for a war movie, I sighed to myself. Another breakdown, just like my life. Maybe fixing things really was all I was good for. Maybe that was all I'd ever be. The guy who repairs other people's broken stuff, while his own life lies in pieces around him. But at least it was something I knew how to do. I spent the rest of that night working on Thompson's Chevy. It wasn't like I had anywhere else to be, and the beer had only left me with a dull headache and a sour taste in my mouth. Better to focus on something I could actually fix. Thompson had shuffled off to the diner for coffee, saying he'd come back in the morning, leaving me alone with his ancient vehicle and my even more ancient thoughts. The problem was obvious from the start. The catalytic inverter was shot to hell, clogged with carbon deposits and corroded through in spots. These old models were notorious for it. I'd pulled it out, turning the crusty piece of metal over my hands, cursing under my breath. Replacements for these older models cost a fortune these days, if you could even find them. Thompson didn't strike me as the type with extra cash lying around. He reminded me a bit of my grandfather, that same weathered dignity, those observant eyes that seemed to see more than they let on. I made a pot of coffee in the ancient Mr. Coffee machine I kept in the corner of the shop. It was going to be a long night. By 2 a.m., I was on my fourth cup, the bitter dregs keeping me just a side of conscious. My mind was spinning in that weird, half-lucid way that happens when you're running on caffeine and insomnia. I stare at the pile of spare parts of my might-be-useful-someday bin, the mechanical equivalent of a junk drawer that every good mechanic keeps. My grandfather's voice echoed in my head. Sometimes you gotta make do with what you got, Davy boy. He was a master of improvisation, could practically build an engine from duct tape and paper clips if pushed. Something clicked in my brain. Maybe it was the coffee. Maybe it was desperation. Maybe it was just that I needed to create something when everything else in my life was falling apart. I mumbled to myself, hands already reaching for parts. If I can't fix my family, at least I can fix this piece of junk. The hours blurred together. I cobbled together a makeshift catalytic converter using parts from 3 different vehicles, adding a custom chamber I designed on the fly. My hands moved almost automatically, guided by some instinct I didn't fully understand. I modified the airflow, adjusted the filtration system, incorporated a heat exchange mechanism I'd been tinkering with for years, but never had a reason to implement. Dawn was breaking when I finally installed my Frankenstein creation into Thompson's Chevy. My eyes burned from lack of sleep, and my back screamed from hours hunched over the workbench. but something felt right, like the way a perfect chord sounds when you hit all the notes. I turned the key, expecting the usual protest of an old engine. What happened next nearly gave me a heart attack. The car started with barely a whisper, a sound so quiet I had to check twice to make sure it was actually running. No backfiring. No black smoke belching from the exhaust. Just a gentle, almost electric smooth purr. I backed it out of the garage and took it for a quick test drive around the empty morning streets. The Chevy moved like it had dropped 20 years, responsive and weirdly efficient. I kept checking the fuel gauge, certain my eyes were playing tricks on me, but it barely moved. By the time I pulled back into the garage, my hands were shaking, not from caffeine this time, but from a strange, unfamiliar feeling. Pride? Hope? I couldn't quite name it. Thompson arrived just after 8, carrying a bag from the diner that smelled like heaven, or at least like bacon and eggs. Figured you might need breakfast, he said, setting it down on my workbench. His eyes moved his car, sitting there so innocently, as if it hadn't just done something impossible. You got it running? I nodded, still not trusting myself to explain what had happened. Take it for a spin. Thompson raised an eyebrow, but climbed in without comment. I watched him pull out of the garage, his face a mask of concentration as he listened to his engine. When he came back 10 minutes later, his expression had changed completely. There was a light in his eyes I hadn't noticed before, a sharp, calculating intelligence. "What exactly did you do to my car, son?" he asked, voice careful, measured. I explained as best I could, showing him the contraption I'd built. Thompson listened intently, asking questions that surprised me with their technical precision. Turned out the old man wasn't just some retiree with a beater car. He was a former engineer for Ford, with a specialization in emission systems. "Test it again," he said, handing me the keys. "I want to be sure." We spent the morning running diagnostics, measuring outputs, calculating efficiency. Thompson had equipment in his trunk that I'd never seen outside a professional lab. Sensors and meters that looked like they belonged in NASA, not Rusty Springs. The numbers didn't lie. My cobbled-together catalytic converter was reducing emissions by nearly 70% compared to standard models. The fuel efficiency had jumped by almost 35%. It was running cleaner than cars a quarter of its age. Thompson stared at me like I just pulled a rabbit out of my hat. "David, do you realize what you created here?" I shrugged, suddenly uncomfortable. "Just fix your car with what I had on hand." He snorted, shaking his head. "This isn't a fix, son. This is a breakthrough. I spent 30 years at Ford, and I never saw anything like this. This is the golden ticket." I laughed, the sound hollow even in my own ears. Me? An inventor? I thought my greatest invention was the peanut butter and potato chip sandwich at 3 a.m. Thompson wasn't laughing. He was looking at me with those penetrating eyes, seeing past the grease-stained mechanic to something I couldn't even see in myself. The auto industry has been trying to solve this emissions problem for decades. Detroit would pay millions for this technology. It's like the Walkman was to the 80s a game changer. My mind couldn't process what he was saying. People like me didn't invent things. We fixed things other people invented. We lived paycheck to paycheck in apartments with leaky roofs. We didn't change the world. But Thompson was adamant. "You need to patent this, immediately." The word patent brought up uncomfortable memories. Karen's voice, cutting and clear. "Your brilliant ideas are just dreams, David. Grow up and face reality." I'd had ideas before, modifications to engines, improvements to existing systems. Karen had always dismissed them as fantasies, distractions from real work. And maybe she'd been right. Who was I to think I could create something valuable? Thompson must have read something in my face. He sighed, suddenly looking every one of his 70-plus years. "Let me guess. Someone important told you that you weren't smart enough? That your ideas weren't worth pursuing?" I didn't answer. Didn't need to. "I've seen it 100 times, he continued. "Some of the best innovations in automotive history came from mechanics, not engineers with fancy degrees. People who understood machines in their bones, not just on paper." He pulled out his phone, scrolling through contacts. "I know a patent attorney. Good guy, honest. Let me make a call." While Thompson stepped outside to make his call, I sat heavily on my workbench stool, mind reeling. Was this really happening? Or was this just another dream that would evaporate in the harsh light of reality? The radio was playing softly in the background, some morning talk show discussing philosophy. The host quoted Nietzsche, "That which does not kill us makes us stronger." I snorted. Yeah, sure. I'd been through the ringer these past months, and I didn't feel stronger. I felt beaten down, hollowed out. But maybe there was something to it. Maybe all that pain had forced me to look at things differently, to solve problems in ways I wouldn't have considered before. Thompson came back, looking pleased. He'll see us tomorrow, 9 a.m. sharp. Fear gripped me suddenly. I can't afford a patent attorney. I can barely afford ramen noodles right now. Thompson waved us away. He owes me a favor. Big one. Don't worry about the money. Worry about getting your ideas on paper. Can you draw up some schematics of what you built? I nodded slowly. Drawing I could do. I'd been sketching engine modifications since high school, doodling improvements in the margins of repair manuals. Good, Thompson said. We'll need everything documented. And David, his voice softened slightly, this could change everything for you. That evening, after Thompson left with his miraculously rejuvenated Chevy, I sat alone in my apartment, trying to wrap my head around the day's events. I'd started sketching the catalytic converter system, pages of notes and diagrams spreading across my kitchen table. Could this really be something? Or was I setting myself up for another crushing disappointment? I took a break and flipped through the local newspaper someone had left at the garage. My heart stuttered when I saw the photo, Lily and Greg at some charity gala, both dressed to the nines. The caption mentioned local attorney Gregory Peterson and his stepdaughter Lily. Stepdaughter. Like I'd never existed. Stepdaughter. The word burned in my brain like acid. Legally, of course. Greg wasn't her stepfather. Not yet, anyway. But the paper had just written me out of existence, as easily as erasing a pencil mark. I stared at Lily's face in the photo. She was smiling, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. Or maybe that was just what I wanted to see. Maybe she was perfectly happy in her new life with her mother's upgraded model of a father, successful, respected, someone who wore suits instead of coveralls. I looked from the newspaper to my sketches and back again. Maybe Thompson was right. Maybe this was my chance to prove I wasn't a nobody after all. I worked through the night, refining my drawings, writing down every detail I could remember about how I'd built the converter. When had I become so precise? Maybe those years of fixing every kind of engine had taught me more than I realized. Maybe I'd been learning all along, even when I thought I was just getting by. By dawn, I had a comprehensive set of schematics and a pounding headache. I showered quickly, trying to wash away the grease under my fingernails. It never fully came off anymore. Years of motor oil had stained them permanently. I put on my one decent shirt, the blue button-down I saved for parent-teacher conferences and court appearances. It felt tight around the collar, or maybe that was just anxiety closing my throat. The patent attorney's office was in Harrisburg, an hour's drive from Rusty Springs. Thompson picked me up in his Chevy, which still ran with that uncanny smoothness that made me question whether I'd actually created it. Nervous? Thompson asked, glancing at my white-knuckle grip on my folder of drawings. Terrified, I admitted, what if he laughs us out his office? What if this is nothing special after all? Thompson's weathered face cracked into a rare smile. He won't laugh. I've already sent him some of the preliminary data. He's intrigued. Just be yourself. Be myself. The advice people give when they don't know what else to say. Who was myself anymore? A failed husband? A forgotten father? A mechanic with grease-stained dreams? The lawyer, Harrison Phelps, wasn't what I expected. No slick suit or corner office with a view. Just a rumpled guy about my age with reading glasses perched on his nose and a cluttered desk that made my workbench look organized. He studied my drawings in silence for what felt like hours, occasionally making a note or asking a clarifying question. Finally, he set them down and looked at me over his glasses. Mr. Reeves, I'll be honest with you. What you created here could be extremely valuable. The emissions reduction alone would be significant for automotive manufacturers facing increasingly strict regulations. The fuel efficiency is an added bonus that consumers would pay premium for. My mouth went dry. So what happens now? What happened was a crash course in patent law, intellectual property rights, and the cutthroat world of automotive innovation. Phelps explained the process, the costs, the timeline. The numbers made my head spin, both the expenses and the potential payoff. The big question, Phelps said finally, is whether you want to license the technology to existing manufacturers or try to develop it yourself. The question seemed absurd. Me, competing with Detroit? Impossible. But licensing meant giving up control, settling for a fraction of the potential value. Thompson, who had been quietly listening, leaned forward. He should explore all options before deciding. I have contacts at several companies who would be interested in seeing this technology demonstrated. On the drive back to Rusty Springs, my mind was racing faster than Thompson's Chevy. For the first time in months, I was thinking about the future, not just surviving it, but actively shaping it. What are you thinking? Thompson asked after several miles of silence. I stared out the window at the passing landscape. The same hills and fields I'd known all my life, suddenly looking different somehow. I'm thinking about Lily, I admitted, about showing her that her old man isn't just nothing. Thompson nodded, understanding his eyes. Family, best reason there is. Back in my apartment, I found myself staring at the photo of Lily I kept on my nightstand. It was from before things fell apart, her 13th birthday, when I had taken her fishing at the lake. She was holding up a smallmouth bass, grinning with such pure joy it made my chest hurt to look at it now. The phone rang, startling me. It was Thompson, his voice urgent and excited. I've been making calls. Got a friend at a testing lab who can verify our emissions data independently. And another buddy who knows someone at Toyota. They're desperate for innovations that could help them meet the new emission standards. This could move fast, David. Really fast. I promised to meet him tomorrow to discuss next steps. After I hung up, I picked up Lily's photo again, tracing her smile with my finger. This is for us, kiddo. I whispered, I'm going to make you proud. I pulled out a fresh sheet of paper and a pencil, sat down at my tiny kitchen table, and began sketching improvements to my design by the light of a single lamp. Dawn would come soon enough. The next 6 months felt like riding a tornado. My quiet life as a small-town mechanic vanished overnight, replaced by a whirlwind of patent filings, prototype testing, and meetings with people whose watches cost more than my truck. I'd stumbled into a world I never knew existed, and most days I felt like a tractor that had accidentally rolled onto a NASCAR track. Thompson became my guide through the strange new universe. Without him, I'd have been lost, or worse, taken advantage of by the first smooth-talking businessman who saw an opportunity to steal my invention. My first big meeting with automotive executives was nearly a disaster. I showed up in my best Levi's and a button-down shirt I'd ironed that morning. The receptionist at the Detroit high-rise gave me a look that said I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere around the janitor's closet. Suit! Thompson had asked when he picked me up that morning. I'd laughed. I thought these jeans were the dress code. He'd shaken his head, but didn't push it. Some battles weren't worth fighting. And honestly, if these people were going to judge me by my clothes rather than my ideas, we didn't have much to talk about anyway. The testing lab confirmed what Thompson had suspected. My catalytic converter reduced emissions by a staggering 73%, while improving fuel efficiency by nearly 40%. The independent verification gave our patent application real teeth, transforming it from a garage mechanic's pipe dream into documented technological innovation. Phelps, the patent attorney, negotiated like a man possessed. They smelled blood in the water, he explained after one particularly tense meeting with representatives from a major manufacturer. You've created something they spent billions trying to develop. They want it, but they want it cheap. The sharks circled closer. A mid-level executive from General Motors arrived at my garage one Tuesday morning, all smiles and handshakes. He introduced himself as Robert, wore a suit that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent, and spoke about synergistic opportunities and strategic partnerships like he was reading from a corporate buzzword bingo card. Then came the offer, $50,000, for all rights to my invention, forever. I'd spent enough time with Thompson and Phelps by then to know this wasn't just lowballing, it was highway robbery. This technology was worth millions, maybe more. I looked at Robert, at his carefully practiced smile that didn't reach his eyes, and thought about all the carburetors I'd fixed over the years. Complex systems designed to mix air and fuel in perfect proportion, each with their own quirks and tricks. I've worked on carburetors trickier than you, I said calmly, and I figured those out too. His smile faltered. He left with my counteroffer, a time-limited licensing agreement with substantial royalties or nothing. 3 weeks later, Toyota came called with a serious offer, not for all rights, but for a preferential licensing agreement that would guarantee my design made it into their next-generation vehicles, with my name attached and royalties that made my head spin. Phelps reviewed the contracts carefully, flagging potential issues, negotiating better terms. When the final papers were signed, I was officially a millionaire, on paper at least. The reality of it didn't sink in until the first deposit hit my bank account. I stared at the number on the ATM screen for so long that the machine timed out and swallowed my card. The local newspaper ran a story. Rusty Springs mechanic revolutionizes auto industry. They use an old photo of me from a Chamber of Commerce directory, looking grease-stained and slightly confused. Seemed fitting somehow. Fame, it turns out, is a strange beast. Suddenly, everyone wanted a piece of me. Local TV stations, industry magazines, even a national morning show that flew me to New York. I sat under bright lights, sweating through my new shirt. I'd compromise on clothes, but still refused to wear a tie, mumbling something about just wanting cars to stop choking the planet. The host laughed like I'd said something hilarious instead of deadly serious. From small-town mechanic to millionaire inventor overnight. The American dream, ladies and gentlemen. Was it the American dream? Maybe. It certainly wasn't the life I'd imagined for myself. In some ways, it was better. In others, it was more complicated than I'd ever anticipated. The first thing I did with the money was pay off my debts, mostly legal fees from the divorce and back child support that Greg had gotten courts to inflate. The second thing was to set up a college fund for Lily that not even Karen could touch. The third was to fix my roof. After that, I had to think bigger. Rusty Springs had been struggling since the textile factory closed in '08. The public library was operating on reduced hours, and the high school had cut all its shop classes due to budget constraints. I remember what my grandfather used to say, "A lucky man fills his own pockets. A good man builds bigger pockets for everyone." So I established a foundation to fund the library and created a free automotive training program for local teenagers who wanted to learn a trade. When the mayor asked why, I quoted Emerson, "Do not go where the path may lead, go instead where there is no path and leave a trail." Then I added, "I'm blazing at trail and work boots, not fancy shoes." The success changed things with my parents, too. They flew in from Arizona for the ribbon-cutting ceremony at the new library wing. Mom hugged me with tears in her eyes, and Dad clapped me on the shoulder with a pride I hadn't seen since my high school football days. "We were wrong, David," Mom said simply. No long explanations or excuses, just acknowledgement. Sometimes that's all you need. My sister Emily called too. "Guess I'm not the only success story in the family anymore," she said, laughing. "My patients keep asking if I'm related to the David Reeves." But the most significant change was brewing with Lily. She didn't call immediately after the news broke. Didn't text. Silence for 3 weeks that felt like 3 years. Then one rainy Tuesday, she appeared at the garage door, soaking wet and looking uncertain. My heart nearly stopped. "Hi, Dad," she said. Just that. 2 words that contained universes. I wanted to rush to her, wrap her in my arms like when she was little. Instead, I carefully wiped my hands on a rag and asked if she wanted some hot chocolate. She nodded, and we went up to my apartment. No longer the sad little space above the garage, but a properly renovated living area with actual furniture and no leaks. She sat awkwardly on my new couch, looking around at the changes. Mom says you got lucky, she finally said. Not accusatory, just reporting. I nodded. Luck played a part. Being desperate enough to try something different played a bigger part. Greg says she started, then stopped herself. Never mind what Greg says. Progress. Small but real. She told me about school, about wanting to apply to art programs, about how her friends now thought I was actually kind of cool for inventing something. I listened, savoring every word like a starving man at a feast. When she was leaving, I gave her two things: a professional grade sketchbook with her name embossed on the cover, and an envelope containing information about a summer art program in New York, already paid for. You're my best project, I told her, voice rough with emotion. Always have been. She hugged me then, brief but real, before pulling back. Not ready for more. Not yet, but it was a start. Her friends might think I was cool now, but winning back my daughter's trust would take more than an invention or money. It would take time and consistency, proving I was still the dad who once fixed her broken toys and taught her to ride a bike. Just when things were looking up, Greg showed his true colors. He filed a lawsuit claiming partial credit for my invention. According to his legal filing, we had discussed the concept during a school event, and I had appropriated his intellectual contribution. Complete fiction, of course. The man probably couldn't identify a catalytic converter if it was labeled and sitting on his desk, but he had resources, connections, and most importantly, a bruised ego that couldn't handle my success. When Thompson told me about the lawsuit, I actually laughed. Greg with a wrench? He'd cut himself. Phelps wasn't amused. Frivolous lawsuits can still be expensive and time-consuming, he warned. And Peterson has friends in the local courts. So we gathered evidence, detailed notes from my initial work, Thompson's testimony about discovering the prototype, dated sketches, and material receipts. We built a fortress of documentation that Greg's fancy law degree couldn't breach. The case dragged on for months, becoming the talk of Rusty Springs. People took sides. Most supported the hometown hero over the outsider. But Karen's friends, the country club set who'd always looked down on my grease-stained existence, stood firmly with Greg. Through it all, Lily walked a tightrope. She never publicly supported either side, caught between warring father figures. I never pushed or choose, never spoke ill of Greg in her presence despite the temptation. Fighting for my invention was important. Fighting for my daughter's heart was essential. Our relationship thawed slowly. She began stopping by the garage after school sometimes, sitting on a stool and doing homework while I worked. Occasionally she'd ask questions about cars or the business side of my invention. Small connections, rebuilt one conversation at a time. One day, she brought a friend, a quiet girl named Megan, who, it turned out, loved classic cars. I showed them the 1966 Mustang I was restoring, explaining the engine work while they listened with surprising interest. Could girls do this kind of work? Megan asked hesitantly. Some of the best mechanics I know are women. I told her honestly. They pay attention to details guys miss. That led to an impromptu lesson on changing oil, with both girls laughing how dirty their hands got, but proud of the new skill. A week later, for more of Lily's friends showed up, curious about cars and a man who'd invented something important enough to be on the news. The free automotive class I'd started suddenly had a new demographic. Teenage girls determined to prove they could turn wrenches with the best of them. In October, 8 months after Thompson Chevy had rolled into my life, I received an invitation to speak at the Detroit Auto Show. My invention was being incorporated into multiple production lines, and the industry wanted to showcase their commitment to greener technology. I was to be the face of automotive innovation. Me, David Reeves, high school graduate and small-town mechanic. When I showed the invitation to Thompson, he smiled that rare, full smile. Told you it was a golden ticket. I spent weeks agonizing over my speech. What did I have to say to an audience of executives, engineers, and industry insiders? I was just a guy who fixed things, who'd gotten lucky once because desperation had pushed me past my usual limits. 2 days before I was set to leave for Detroit, my phone pinged with a text from Lily. My hands were so slick with nervous sweat that I dropped the phone twice before I could read it. Dad, I'm coming to Detroit. Mom said no, But Greg said yes. Weird, right? I'll be there for your speech. I stare at those words for a full minute, my heart hammering against my ribs. My daughter was coming to see me speak. My daughter was proud enough of me to fight for this. Then panic set in. What if I messed up? What if I embarrassed her in front of all those important people? What if I proved Karen right, that I was just a greased monkey who'd stumbled into temporary success? That night, I stood in front of my bathroom mirror, note cards clutched in my sweaty hand, practicing a speech that suddenly felt inadequate. I wasn't a polished presenter. I spoke in plain language about practical things. Would that be enough? What if I let her down again? I asked my reflection. The man in the mirror, older, a bit more confident than he'd been a year ago, but still fundamentally the same guy who'd lost his family and nearly lost himself, stared back without answers. I tossed the cards aside and decided to speak from the heart instead, about second chances and unexpected opportunities, about the value of practical knowledge and the dignity of working with your hands, about rebuilding what seemed broken beyond repair. If I was going to fail, at least I'd fail as myself, not some corporate polished version I didn't recognize. With that decision made, I went back to my bedroom and pulled out the suit Thompson had convinced me to buy for the occasion. I laid it carefully across a chair and set my alarm. Tomorrow I'd drive to Detroit, and the day after, I'd stand on that stage with my daughter watching. No pressure, just the most important performance of my life. The Detroit Auto Show Convention Center looked like it could swallow Rusty Springs whole. Chrome and glass everywhere, polished floors that reflected the spotlights, and more suits than I'd seen in my entire life. I adjusted my tie for the 20th time that morning, feeling like it was slowly choking me. Thompson stood beside me backstage, calm as ever. "Stop fidgeting," he muttered. "You look fine." Easy for him to say. He wasn't about to speak in front of 3,000 people, including every major automotive executive in the country, and most terrifyingly, his own daughter. I'd spotted Lily when she entered, sitting about halfway back with one of her friends. She'd texted me earlier. "We're here. Break a leg." Just that. No pressure or anything. The industry spokesperson was wrapping up her introduction. Something about revolutionary innovation and the future of emissions control. Then she was saying my name, and Thompson was giving me a gentle push toward the steps. My heart hammered against my ribs as I walked to the podium. The spotlights almost blinded me, turning the audience into a dark, anonymous mass. But somewhere in that darkness sat my daughter, watching, waiting to see if her old man would make a fool of himself. I took a deep breath, set aside my note cards, and just started talking. I'm not a scientist. I began, my voice surprisingly steady. I'm not an executive. I'm just a mechanic from a small town in Pennsylvania who believes you can fix almost anything if you care enough to try. The words came easier after that. I explained how the converter worked in simple terms, how it had started as a desperate solution for one broken-down Chevy and ended up as technology that could reduce automotive emissions by more than 70%. Sometimes the best innovations come from necessity. I said, when you've got nothing left to lose, you stop being afraid to try the impossible. I looked out at the sea of faces, finally able to make out individuals as my eyes adjusted to the lights. I caught sight of Lily, leaning forward in her seat, expression intent. My grandfather used to say, "The world is an engine. Keep it running clean." He taught me that every problem has a solution if you're willing to get your hands dirty looking for it. Whether it's a broken carburetor or a planet choking on exhaust fumes, the principle is the same. Identify the problem, understand the system, and find a way to make it work better. I paused, suddenly emotional. I'd like to dedicate this award to two things I love. My hometown of Rusty Springs, which taught me the value of fixing things instead of throwing them away, and my daughter Lily, who remind me every day why we need to leave this world better than we found it. The applause started slowly, then built into something thunderous. People were standing, actually standing. For me, a guy who, less than a year ago, had been sleeping on a pull-out couch above his garage, wondering if he'd ever see his kid again. Afterward came a blur of handshakes, business cards, congratulations. But I kept looking for only one face in the crowd. When I finally broke free from a group of Japanese executives, I found her waiting near the stage, eyes shining with something that looked suspiciously like pride. "That was really good, Dad," she said. Simple words that meant everything. Later, at the reception, Lily introduced me to her friend, a serious girl named Zoe who was considering engineering as a career. While we talked, I noticed Lily telling a small group of industry people something that made them look at me with new interest. When she caught my questioning glance, she shrugged. "I just told them about how you used to fix my bike every time I crashed it, even when Mom said I should be more careful with my things. How you never made me feel bad about breaking stuff." After the reception, Lily surprised me by asking to stay with me at the hotel instead of going back to her friend's place. We ordered room service and watched bad cable TV movies until midnight, laughing at the terrible special effects like we used to do on our old movie nights. A week after Detroit, the lawsuit from Greg mysteriously disappeared. The legal filing was withdrawn, without explanation. I later heard from Mike, who'd heard from his cousin who worked at the courthouse, that the judge had taken one look at the case and told Greg's attorney privately that pursuing it would be professionally embarrassing. The TV coverage of the auto show had been extensive. Karen and Greg had certainly seen it, seen the standing ovation, heard my speech, witnessed Lily's obvious pride in her grease monkey father. Sometimes justice doesn't need a gavel, just a truth displayed for everyone to see. My parents flew in from Arizona again, this time staying for 2 weeks. Dad spent days with me at the garage, not working, just watching and asking questions like he was trying to make up for years of missed conversations. Mom hugged me in the kitchen one evening, suddenly tearful. "We were wrong to push you toward what we wanted instead of seeing what you were good at. Can you forgive us?" Family reconciliation isn't instant. It comes in small moments that build over time. But that evening, something long broken inside me began to mend. Even Emily came around. "You're probably the only mechanic with an actual fan club," she teased during a video call, showing me a newspaper clipping about my invention that she framed for her office. My doctor colleagues are insufferably jealous. The money changed some things, of course. I moved out of the apartment above the garage into a proper house. Nothing flashy, just a craftsman-style place on Oak Street with a big garage for projects and, most importantly, a room specifically for Lily. I painted it teal, her current favorite color, and bought art supplies that the salesperson assured me were professional grade. I expanded the garage into a proper auto center, hiring 4 new mechanics and modernizing the equipment, but I kept the old radio and the faded photos on the wall. Some things shouldn't change, even when everything else does. The judge revised our custody arrangement, finally listening to what Lily wanted instead of what Karen and Greg demanded. She started staying with me 3 nights a week, sometimes more. I'd come home to find her homework spread across the kitchen table or hear her laughing with friends in the backyard. One evening I found her in my home workshop, carefully examining the original prototype of the catalytic converter that had changed everything. "How did you know it would work?" she asked. I admitted. I just knew I had nothing to lose by trying. She nodded thoughtfully, turning the piece in her hands. "That's pretty brave, actually." From the mouth of a 16-year-old, there could be no higher praise. Life settled into a new rhythm. The royalty checks kept coming, but the novelty wore off. What didn't wear off was the joy of having my daughter back in my life, of seeing my hometown revitalized partly through my foundation's work, of knowing I created something genuinely useful. The '66 Mustang restoration project became our thing. Every Sunday afternoon, Lily would come out to the garage wearing overalls I'd bought her as a joke that she took completely seriously. We'd work side by side, me teaching, her learning with a quickness that impressed even Thompson when he stopped by. "You're holding that wrench like it's a selfie stick," I teased the first time she tried to loosen a bolt. She rolled her eyes but adjusted her grip. Not everyone is born knowing this stuff. Dad, nobody's born knowing it. That's why we teach each other. By the time the Mustang was ready, gleaming candy apple red under the garage lights, Lily could change a tire, replace brake pads, and diagnose basic engine problems better than most grown men I knew. I'd initially planned to keep the car, a reward to myself for everything that had happened. But then I heard about a fundraiser for a local group home for kids without families, and it seemed like the right thing to do. When I told Lily my plan to donate the Mustang for the charity auction, I expected disappointment. Instead, she nodded approvingly. Can we at least take it for one drive first? So we did, down country roads with the windows open, the engine growling like a contented lion, father and daughter restored like the classic machine carrying us forward. At the auction the following weekend, our Mustang fetched twice what I'd expected. The new owner, a collector with deep pockets and a deeper appreciation for craftsmanship, asked us both to sign the inside of the glove compartment. As we watched the car drive away, Lily looped her arm through mine. Thoreau said, "Live simply, love generously. I think that's your real superpower, Dad." I glanced down, surprised. "Since when do you quote Thoreau?" She shrugged. "AP English. Besides, you're not the only one who could be philosophical." That night, sitting on my porch watching fireflies rise on the lawn like sparks from an invisible fire, I thought about engines and families and second chances. The world runs on all three. Complex systems that break down sometimes, but can almost always be repaired with enough patience and the right tools. Greg and Karen eventually moved to Chicago for his new job at a bigger law firm. Lily still saw her mother regularly, flying up for holidays and long weekends. The bitterness between us gradually dissolved, replaced by a cautious civility for Lily's sake. Sometimes healing means accepting that some relationships function better with distance and clear boundaries. My little auto training program expanded into a proper technical school, accredited and everything. We offered scholarships to kids who reminded me of myself at their age, mechanical aptitude, but not enough money for college. Some of them came back to work for me after graduating. Others went on to jobs with major manufacturers. One particularly brilliant young woman was recruited by NASA to work on rover engines for future Mars missions. The patent royalties continued flowing in, more money than I could spend in a lifetime. After setting aside plenty for Lily's future and my own retirement, I established a larger foundation focused on technical education and environmental innovation. Thompson agreed to serve as chairman, his analytical mind perfectly suited to directing resources where they do the most good. Never thought I'd be a philanthropist, I told him one day as we reviewed grant applications. He raised an eyebrow. "What did you think you were doing all those years? Fixing Widow Clarkson's car for cookies, just on a smaller scale." He had a point. Maybe I hadn't changed as much as I thought, just upgraded my tools. On Lily's 18th birthday, I gave her two presents. Keys to a restored 1969 Camaro SS in electric blue that I'd secretly been working on for months. The exact car she'd fallen in love with at a classic car show we attended, and an admission letter from the Rhode Island School of Design. Her dream school, with a note confirming her scholarship was actually a full ride secretly funded by me. Her friends practically screamed when they saw that car in the driveway with a big red bow on it. She cried when she opened the second gift, then punched my arm. "You sneaky jerk," she said, but her smile told a different story. At her graduation party later that spring, I overheard her telling a friend, "My dad taught me something important. Real coolness isn't about what you own or what you look like. It's about kindness. It's about fixing things that matter. Life isn't perfect. Never will be. There are still days when I miss the simplicity of my old life, when my back aches from an old injury, when I wonder if I've done enough with the unexpected gift I was given. But those moments pass, replaced by the satisfaction of work that matters and relationships that heal. Sometimes, late at night in my workshop, I still think about that desperate night when Thompson's old Chevy rolled in, backfiring and smoking. How close I came to giving up entirely. How one small decision to keep trying, to fix one more broken thing, changed everything. Maybe that's the secret engine that drives us all forward. Not money or fame or recognition, but the simple human desire to repair what's broken, to make something work again, to leave things better than we found them. As my grandfather always said, the world is an engine. Keep it running clean. I've got grease under my fingernails that will never fully wash away. I still wear Levi's most days instead of suits. I still think a good socket wrench set is more valuable than almost anything you can buy in a fancy store. Some things don't change, even when everything else does. And that's exactly as it should be.